I feel like I've seen enlightenment, and I thought it was going to be about levitating and telekinesis, and it's actually just about an increased awareness of how annoying I am. Wanted to full disclosure this or not, but then I blabbed about it on the Patreon. So
yeah, there's not really much that you do in life that's private.
I am an open book. Yeah,
very much.
Everything that's private is just like, it's because it involves other people, and I'm trying to be considerate of them.
But I appreciate how like raw and authentic you actually are, because there's some, at times there's things that you're like so flippant about on the podcast, and I'm in my head, I'm like, I probably would have kept that just to myself. Not like if somebody asks me about it, I'll tell it, but I'm not going to be like, I just love it. Like you'll get into something one day and the next day you're preaching about it everywhere. Even if it starts to become something that is like, oh, you figure out you don't resonate with after a week, then you're ranting about how you don't resonate with it anymore.
The opposite of it. Yeah, it's really insufferable. We never got into we're not going to do it today either, but the profile lines in human design, because that is very 1-3 of me, is I deep dive things and I experiment with them, and then I assign myself an expert 5 minutes in, and then it brings me so much satisfaction and joy to share hacks and shortcuts that I have found in my life. And so I really have the perfect job.
And you're very much in alignment with your design profile right now.
Yeah, my lifestyle is very in line, so I can
still deconditioning here and there, but
yeah,
as we all do.
And a lot of it I was doing before I even learned about human design, you know? But a lot of the deconditioning or like the deconditioning the shame for not fitting into what society thinks I should do. Like I got that benefit from human design, but just out of like survival, I had already kind of created a life by my mid 40s that helped me work with my own energy.
That was the hardest part for me, like some of the human design stuff. When I learned about it, there were certain aspects that I had naturally kind of discovered at some point in life, but was repressing because of the cultural standards on it. And so like I felt like I couldn't be that.
Right.
And then when I learned human design, it was liberating to be like, no, this is actually how you're supposed to function. And then it was just, still deconditioning it because it's a habit I've built up to be a certain way. But that's what I liked so much about like the first dive into human design. There were so many things I realized about my own energy that I wasn't fully embodying because of some culture idea that I didn't want. I felt like I couldn't be that way.
Right.
Then reading the human design, I was like, oh no, I'm like supposed to be.
I'm supposed to be this way. Yeah. I think becoming people who don't leave the house much or are not engaging with people you don't know has like helped us a lot. I do notice if you put me into a situation, because I think getting rid of people pleasing or healing your relationship with people pleasing is so important in order to actually become yourself. Like that, I think that's the greatest deconditioning you have to do is like stop managing other people's experience of you. And that's really hard because most of the time when we are in that managing other people's experience of us, we're in like a trauma response or like a nervous system activation. And I don't feel like I have the steering wheel in my hands when I get anxious, you know? And so for me, it's people I don't know. I'm very comfortable with people I do know. I'm much more confrontational with people I do know. Unless you prove to not be a safe person to be honest with, then I would. But I cannot control myself when I'm around people I don't know. And that has gotten a lot better since I did SSP, which was the nervous system work that I did, which you can find on my free Patreon if you want to hear about it. But yeah, anyway, all that to say, I am kind of an open book. I try to be private from 2021 to 2023.
It didn't work out for
exhausting. It's truly exhausting. I don't know how people are secretive or it takes so much bandwidth in the mind, which I think we will talk about later in this episode. Why being an open book makes it much easier to be to use higher dimensional gifts because you're not using all your energy in your brain to hide things.
Yeah, that's a subtle thing. I think we often get used to it. Like once you've developed some kind of wall where you're not like being your full authentic self, there actually is a lot of energy that goes into keeping that up.
Right.
That you just get used to, and then only until you actually start to, stop doing that do you realize that there's like, oh my God, I have an abundance of energy for things that I'm actually into. Or you start to get more sensitive, and then you realize, maybe I am kind of reading other people's energy in a way that I wasn't before. But it's just simply because you're like, you have 50% more bandwidth during the day because you're not trying to keep a secret from someone,
Right. When I was young, I was super full of shit. I mean, like incredibly full of shit, like compulsive liar, just making up fantastical tales.
Just like for sport.
Yeah. There used to be a voice in my head when I was young that said, this will show them. And then and it was very subconscious. Like I can access the memories of the part of me that was making up the stories now. But my relationship with my mind was very different before I woke up. And now I can hear that this will show them. And my theory is that when I was getting molested, and nobody did anything about it. No one was doing anything about it. That's when I really started to act out. And I think I created like an altar or some aspects of myself that was trying to get attention, but like that attention was really me trying to get someone to pay attention to what's happening to me. And then it just became a big part of who I was. And I don't think I stopped compulsively lying. And by that, I mean like, yeah, I was kind of the kind of person that would, and I always moved, across the country back and forth between my parents' house. So it was just straight up made up scenarios. It was either something I heard someone else say, or it was something I saw on a TV show, or it was some scenario that I made up. It's just making myself more interesting, I guess. And the whole time I was having an extremely interesting life. And that's what really made it go away, was I didn't realize that my already pre-existing life was bonkers. I had some distorted perception of how much should be happening in one person's life. And so I was surviving all of these things and experiencing all these crazy experiences, and then also making things up. So an example of this was, and I don't think I've told this story on the podcast, but from the ages of 12 to 15, I went to live with my dad and stepmom in Delaware. And people who have born and raised in Delaware, like they all know each other, and especially the boomers, because they're very social. And at one point, freshman year of high school, they have me in a day hospital where I ride like a small bus. Did I tell the story on here before?
No.
To a hospital where I go to school in a psych ward. And this is after most of 8th grade, I was in and out of the adolescent psychiatric hospital. And now I would say, you guys, it was autism. But they spent a lot of time trying to figure out what's wrong with me. And so the day hospital was great. That was where I went from failing every single class to straight A's, principal's list, because there was no teacher talking up front. But there was only like 3 of us on the bus. And so I would talk to the bus driver, and I had the bus driver convinced that I was a teen mom. I am barely 15 at this point. I'm Phoenix's age. And I am even bringing pictures of my sister, who's 10 years younger than me, to show the bus driver. And like, I get on the bus and I'd be tired, and she's just like, how was it? And I was like, oh, the baby was up all night. So rough. Anyway, I was like that my whole childhood, teen years. And I got away with it quite a bit in Portland because no one knew anyone. But I did not know that woman drank at the bar my stepmom was a bartender at. And so at one point she was like, you know what? Your daughter is a real miracle. I mean, how she's like going to school and raising a baby. And my stepmom was like, what? So cringe. I very rarely got caught. And I used to think that was because I was really good at it. But I think in hindsight, I was probably so weird that people just like kind of okey doke me, like I do now when someone's compulsively lying to me. But anyway, you do have to like manage all your secrets. You got to make sure that this person doesn't know that this. Yeah,
you got to keep the narrative clean. Yeah. Make sure other people like have the same narrative you've been telling a different friend in case they talk. It all checks out. It can become a spider web of lies.
I think about people who triangulate and how much work they have to put into keeping. They're like sowing discord and like character assassinating people in a friend group, and they have to keep everyone else from talking about it. And it's all subconscious. You're not consciously thinking about you're doing it. But yeah, so I just found it's easier just to be honest and not keep secrets.
Psychopath energy.
Yeah. I've known a couple. Anyway, so
speaking of psychopaths.
Speaking of full disclosure, I feel like if I say it, it's going to help me feel more comfortable talking. And that's also it, is like a lot of times it'll be a big deal. Something will be a big deal in my head. And if I just say it, then it's like, whatever. So I'll just be like, I feel insecure. So I have raging ADHD, which I did get diagnosed with back then. And they put me on Ritalin, but I let some friends I didn't really like the Ritalin, and I let some friends take it at a sleepover. And That didn't go well. There were some kids in the hospital drinking charcoal or whatever. A little
shit.
dramatic. So my parents took me off of it, and then I self-medicated with methamphetamines in my 20s for 5 years. And once I got clean, I just felt like treating the ADHD means stimulants, and the stimulants are meth. They are the same. They're amphetamines. I can now tell it's the same thing. And so for a long time, I was afraid I would get addicted to it because I do love to go fast. And there have been a few times over the years where the ADHD was just so hard to manage that I thought about doing it. I think the first time I thought about doing it was about 2 years clean. I think my dad talked me out of it, if I remember correctly. He was freaked out by it. I'm not sure about that, but that's all I remember is having a conversation with him about it. And then I got very good at managing it. Like, I can't keep track of things. I don't remember things very well, but I'm very good with a calendar. I have a lot of like coping skills to somewhat stay on top of things. And I did build a life that I can deal with like a week of executive dysfunction a month. So I'll be very productive and have energy and get things done in a short period of time. And then I'll have like one day a month where I can handle bureaucracy and 3D shit that I resent because that's the hardest. And then I like rot in bed for like a week, a month. That's kind of been my cycle for a long time. There are a ton of things that I'm just now finding out are ADHD adjacent that I didn't actually know. Thank you, TikTok. But it's something I've always dealt with, and it's something I'm really resistant to seeing as a disability because I do think so many of the coolest aspects of my personality are the results of ADHD and autism, now that I understand autism also. And I do truly believe that neurodivergence is an upgrade to where we're going. But I do think, especially now that I have tried meds, that in the cross of planning, it is debilitating. It is a disability in that framework. So, one of the ways that I've managed it over the years is lifting weights and being physically active. Also, as a manifesting generator, it's very necessary for physical activity. Otherwise, your battery is like a battery of an old truck, and you won't be able to, the truck won't run because you left it sitting too long. When I got Lyme disease in 2020, I laid in, I was very sedentary for the next year. Also, it was during the pandemic. Sedentary for the next year and a half, I guess. And then it was about a year. Then I already knew like this isn't good for me. So I tried to work with a personal trainer as I was recovering from Lyme. It was so hard. And then I never got momentum. And then I got pregnant, which for me is like back in bed all day, every day. And then I almost died in a miscarriage. So I was back in bed. And so I really lost like any momentum I ever had. I lost a lot of muscle. And I lost all the motivation, and then perimenopause kicked in, and I've just not been able to get momentum, to get physically active enough to get momentum. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's
You're
a
stuck in
cycle,
a little loop,
in a horrible loop. And we started going to the gym at one point, but then we didn't stick to it. And then I've started working out at home multiple times and didn't stick to it. And in perimenopause, it's like if you lose muscle, then you start to lose bone. This is like, has a massive impact on the rest of your life. And I knew that and was really vigilant in my late 30s. And now I'm, in my late 40s. And it's just not been good. So then after the arm lift, I was really just, if I don't have something like we need to go out of town or something, it's like I'm just sitting in this bed. And there are days where I literally can't get out of the bed, And so I started taking a supplement, and then the supplement made me feel like I had vertigo after taking it for a couple of weeks. So I finally just surrendered to the fact that I needed help. And we know I don't love Western medicine, but I don't think anything is everything. And I know my body resonates with stimulants. I really haven't done it ever out of concern that I would like it too much. But I'll actually be 20 years sober this month. And I really don't think this version of me likes it that much. I'm like too sensitive for coffee now. So anyway, I went and saw a doctor and got put on 30 milligrams of Vyvanse, for people that know about that. Vyvanse really, I was much more attracted to than Adderall. I still don't think I would take Adderall, which is fine because they wouldn't give it to me because I was honest with them about the meth. I think I probably need a lower dose, and I'm on day 5, so I'm still figuring it out. Immediately day 1, up, walking outside, working out. I mean, just night and day.
This bitch was dusting every corner of the house at 7 a.m. Great.
It was January 2nd, so the kids had a party, or January 1st, so the kids had a party for New Year's Eve, so the whole house was trash. So it was a very convenient day to start Vyvanse.
It was clean by 1 a.m.
Anyway, all that to say, I'm still figuring it out. I noticed that, and I'm not planning to take it for very long. I really just want to get strong again and get momentum. The good dopamine for me comes from when I get to the point that I am addicted to moving my body, and I'm just so far from that. And I'm also like, my mobility is fucked from sitting still. And in the last year, every time I try to go for a walk, I mean, I'm looking at the clock every 2 minutes to see when can I turn around to be done. And now when I go out for a walk, I don't even want to come back. Yeah. I stay gone until I have something to do.
It's great. So you're trying to use it kind of as like a boost to get you out of the perpetual cycle of not working out, not doing the healthy things. So then you can, readjust your mind to get the dopamine from those activities instead of the...
Yeah, I didn't even know about dopamine until the last few years. Like there was no information about ADHD until TikTok, really. I don't think. I guess maybe other social media platforms, but I've really learned a lot about dopamine from TikTok. So previously I would get an exercise rhythm, and once I had the rhythm, I would be addicted to it. Now I understand that's because I wired my brain to seek dopamine from working out. And during those times of my life, I'm less screen time. I eat better. I sleep better. I'm always happy. I have a lot of serotonin, apparently. I accomplish things. I focus better. But I would get knocked off of those rhythms if something happened, like a vacation, or I got sick, or something that would take me out of that. And then I would need something to motivate me to get back. And I now understand it's because the dopamine, what my brain is attributing dopamine to would change. So if I go on a vacation and I'm like eating a lot of sugar or something, now my brain wants the dopamine from the sugar. Or if I'm sick and I spend the whole time on the phone, now my brain wants the dopamine from the phone. And so then there would have to be something that makes me want to start working out again. And, one of the best rhythms I ever got into was 2016, 2017. It was because I was motivated by getting fit for This Is Not Happening. And so I would have to have some sort of thing that would motivate me to do it. And back when I cared about being overweight or whatever because of what society thinks, I used to have that programming that would actually sometimes help me in very small, short doses. But over time I healed and realized like what other people think of your body doesn't matter at all. And it actually took away some motivation, And that would only motivate me for, like I said, for 5 minutes. But that 5 minutes would help me get into a rhythm. And so I've been saying since 2021, I just need to get like a month under my belt uninterrupted, and then it'll take care of itself, So anyway, that was what I was hoping I could do with Vyvanse. So I went to the doctor, and and kind of in my head, I'm like, these people want to give me pills to make me take them for the rest of my life because everyone I know on this shit is on it forever. And I was like, tell me if this is harebrained, But this is what I'm thinking. I take this for 6 months to a year. I can already tell you on day 4, I'm not going to need it that long. And I get all my rhythms back. And then I should be good. Like, unless I get really sick or knocked out or whatever. And he was like, yeah, I mean, that's how we hope you use it. That's how we would like people to use it, is use the temporary boost in dopamine to create structures in your life that you don't need it anymore. So that's what I'm doing.
Nice.
It makes the autism worse. So I'm like, get more overstimulated, and the social anxiety is worse, I notice. Like I said, I'm probably going to ask for a lower dose next month. But I've noticed what I kind of want to be, I just kind of want to be alone and in my head the whole time, because I am very focused and I can get things done. And so I noticed if I spend a lot of time by myself, it's harder to talk, which is not exactly great for podcasting. So saying all that to say, I might stumble over some words.
I've been calling you Vivi when you're on the Vyvanse. Vivi's here. She's ready to get some work done. There's no work? Okay, that's fine. She can dust the corner. You can.
It's not quite that bad.
She'll find something. Yeah, it's actually not that bad. I haven't not noticed a huge difference. I mean, you're definitely more energy, more like passion, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good.
So speaking of neurodivergence, we had to take a road trip yesterday, and for the love of God, yes, we have heard of the telepathy tapes. We have heard of the telepathy tapes. I get no less than 3 messages per day for the last however long the telepathy tapes have been out, with people asking me if I've heard of the telepathy tapes. And I think what had happened was that has activated PDA in me, where I've become very resistant to listening to the telepathy tapes. And so I worked through that. We listened to some of it. You've been listening.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had the same response, to be honest, early on. A lot of times these podcasts, something will come out and then it trends and everybody, everyone's watching it. It's like the new Netflix series kind of thing. Some Netflix thing, and then everybody's talking about it. And I am pretty hipster in the way that, like, when that happens, I'm like, yeah, I don't care. It's probably not good if everyone's watching it.
We're such dicks.
Such dicks. And you miss a lot of things by having that mindset. But I think I actually did, like, the first recommendation. I think you sent it to me, and I liked the cover, and I was like, oh, this looks like it's actually probably good. Listened to about half of the first episode, and I'm kind of have an aversion to the NPR kind of like Radio Lab podcast style. There's like this, I don't know why. I mean, I used to really be into it, but
I figured out why yesterday, and I 100% have that also.
Yeah. And so I lost interest in it pretty quick, but more than anything, I mean, I got what it was about, and like felt like we've had so many discussions around this idea and have always, for a long time, assumed this to be true, that like a lot of what we call or label as a disability has got way more behind it than that, and that there was potential that, ADHD, autism, Asperger's, all these like different versions of it was something that, like, yes, there were some cultural, social like hurdles to get through with it, but there was these other kind of superpowers that also seemed to go in line with some of these diagnoses. And so the idea that autistic people, a lot of them are telepathic or are towing the line of that and have a lot more sensitive awareness than I think culture has labeled them. So we've talked about that a lot, and it's something that I just feel to be true. And so this thing was kind of just reinforcing that to me, that I was like, oh yeah, well, I feel like we already knew this, but so I just didn't get the pull to go down like a rabbit hole where it's something that I don't know about and I'm very curious and it kind of pings.
Right.
This just didn't do it for me. I don't know why, but then I feel like we just keep getting, everybody keeps reaching out to me too, talking about it. So I dove in again and started listening more. And then that's, when on this last little road trip, we decided to together listen to a couple of them. And I do think that's like kind of where I'm at. It's like something that a lot of the spiritual community has already known maybe, but it is cool to get a bit more of a scientific perspective on it and scientific studies on it that validate it for part of the culture, because parts of us can't accept anything unless it's scientifically fucking proven. And so I think that's cool. I like that it's, that seems to be adding a little bit more pressure to validating that,
Yeah.
It's frustrating to me though that so many people won't accept, like, only until there's a podcast that's scientifically proving it like this, that's trending and big, will a good group of people finally go, oh, okay, so it is real. I didn't think it was real before because it was just a bunch of woo-woo people talking about it.
Ugh, yeah.
And I hate that aspect that some of us have to, like, even if we call ourselves spiritual and sensitive into like the, non-physical world, we still find ourselves like doubting things until it is written on an academic paper and there's a general consensus that it's real. It's just such slow evolution in that way. It's kind of frustrating, but it's really good. I'm not all the way through it yet, but
How far did you get?
I think I'm on episode 6 or 7.
Oh, okay.
And there's a lot of cool stuff that I didn't know. I mean, as far as like stories and specifics that have happened in that podcast that were really interesting. The most interesting to me is this idea of the hill, that there's like a non-physical space or dimension that a lot of non-verbal, autistic, telepathic kids go to hang out and converse with each other. They're on different sides of the globe, but can meet in this same location and talk and connect. And that's such a cool idea that there's an actual kind of like meeting zone that they all go to hang out.
Like an ether internet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, so my resistance, I can't listen to that tone of voice for very long at all. That NPR sound, like I've never listened to anything NPR-ish. It just reminds me of like annoying people in Portland. I don't know. And I couldn't figure out why I've never liked that until we were listening to it yesterday. And I realized that the tone, because the narrator, when she's talking to the people, she's interviewing them, she uses regular inflection in her voice. And I can listen to that. But then when she's narrating, she's using NPR inflection in her voice. And I realized that the thing that's happening there that's like really grating for me, and that's fine if it's not grating for other people, that's fine. Is also, FYI, it's very hard for me to take in information audibly. It's really hard for me to take in information long form, period, anyway. But in order for me to take in information audibly, it needs to be like the inflection has to be a certain thing. And this ain't it. It's coddling to materialists I figured out yesterday. I was like, oh, that's why I don't like it. It's inauthentic because it's coddling to materialists. Materialists don't want authenticity. They want like sterile robot facts or something. And so there's a condescension in the way that, like, let's say Neil deGrasse Tyson, who drives me out of my fucking mind, talks. And then there is this person is trying to present something that is not in line with what scientific materialism is currently ready to acknowledge. And so she's babying them almost. And so I think what's grating to me, and I don't know if that's everything on NPR that's annoying to me, but what's grating to me in that is the difference in authenticity when she's having an interview with a person and then when she's presenting it to people who she knows are going to kind of reject it.
Yeah. I think that's probably what bothers me too. I think we are just all hungry for authenticity, and you can hear it even on the mic when someone's tone. It's like, can you just be real? And it's something that I think in the past I really did like NPR. Radio Lab was something I listened to like every week. And, it took that to be real truth and like really good journalism until you really start to decondition and see all the little propaganda kind of arms of culture that then became something that I was like, oh, this is actually, I need to question a lot of this stuff. Turns out a lot of the stuff I was learning wasn't totally true. It's just one perspective. And I kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. Just anything that's coming at me with not like a authentic expression of experience is something that I'm going to have to do a little bit of extra work and to discern what resonates or not. And so there's something in my listening that just, when it's that specific tone, I'm kind of checked out, not taking it.
It's like perfect. It's curated. It's running through a filter. I'm talking kind of NPR. And I've only ever heard it in the periphery, but the thing with academia and that whole like thing, that whole like liberal elitist thing where like, educated, not educated kind of fucking vibe. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of room for authenticity there because you're like, it's all like you're putting on a show.
Right.
Everything's putting on a show. It doesn't get the same scrutiny as like people putting on a show by getting lip filler and, like Hollywood putting on a show. But to me, it's the same thing. It's just still you're like posturing that you are an expert or that you know things or whatever. It's all still very egoic and very loud in the ether, by the way. But like, yeah. So then once I forced myself to listen to this, and I probably digested an episode maybe total. She's not that. This host is not that at all.
Right.
But she's almost like masking their language back to them to try to get them to be open to it. And, to me, I'm just like, that's just not your audience. You know what I mean? We don't need this drives me insane. We do not need the scientific materialist community to validate the material spirituality community because it just is where we're fucking going. They can show up to the party as late as they would like. I don't care. And this is maybe my own trauma showing up here. As someone who was like awake for a long time, watching the way that like the scientific materialist perspective talks about people who have supernatural experiences. So there's probably wounding in there and it's kind of a vague they, it's just the perspective. But I, at this point in my life, at 25 years awake next week, don't give a fuck if scientific materialists haven't figured out how to see things besides the physical world yet. And I don't need them to accept my perception of reality. And that's like a hard lesson that I've learned. And a lot of that work was done as soon as I started talking in microphones. I really kind of had to face that. So I think listening to someone else, I'm kind of putting this together in real time, listening to someone else still trying to earn validation and being seen from a community that's not going to see you. Why? Because if they see you, and I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about the construct, right? If it sees you, it's the death of itself.
Right.
Scientific materialism is the god of this realm currently, and it's about to be demoted or replaced. And so it's going to, you just have to wait for individuals, like actual humans have to have their own experience. And I've had people, we just listened to an old podcast where I said this, but back in the Soberish days, I had people who would tune into Soberish because I was still doing comedy and they were looking into what I was doing with comedy. And they would leave like reviews of Soberish and be like, this is insane. All those reviews are gone now because I accidentally deleted Soberish. But this is actually nuts. This person needs help, whatever. And then they would book a session a year later and be like, it happened to me. Like, I thought you were batshit and now it's happening to me. So that's what has to happen. Like, there is no trying to get them to understand it.
Trying to get the system to understand something that's like not going to benefit it. Yeah.
And that podcast could be a lot more fun if you just were instead talking to the millions of people who have already shifted into a different type of consciousness.
Yeah. It's kind of like I guess on the tip of like getting the scientific material world to start to accept some of the more non-physical things. It's like you got to start somewhere. And so I think that's where, like, I guess, I mean, you don't have to start somewhere if it's not really going to ever click in, but it's like a good attempt. I guess I came into it being like, this is fucking hipster, like, whatever, I'm cooler than this. It's already, we already know that, you know?
Yeah.
But then I was like humbled by, it's like, well, this is actually it's pretty cool that it's confirming that phenomena for a lot of people that were kind of doubtful. But yeah, I don't see it making any headways as far as like really getting science to accept this and start to move forward, which I think is just, in general, it's such a frustrating thing. I feel like a kid a lot of the times when I'm exploring more conscious ideas and figuring out like, oh, well, we have a lot of latent superpowers that we need to practice to learn more. And I feel like a kid in the way that I'm just curious to observe more and decondition things. And when you learn that there are certain people in culture that are like stopping that curiosity or like the ability to playfully like figure out and learn more about ourselves, it's frustrating because it feels like, I mean, there's a million reasons why they're trying to suppress that or resisting this idea that we are telepathic, that humans have that ability, that is even fucking real. They spend so much time trying to prove that that's false. It's just this idea in my head. I'm like, if we have this rigid scientific blueprint, we have to put everything through and it has to be proven 3 times with a blind study or whatever, all that bullshit. It's just so slow to actually evolve and get somewhere because there's all these little things that have to be checked off, and a certain consensus of people need to be on the same page for us now to all go potentially experience that reality. It's like there's just so many hurdles to evolving when you realize there's like a reason that certain people want to suppress certain information so they can continue doing whatever they're doing. It's just frustrating to know that, like, okay, I'm 40 now and telepathy has been possible my whole life.
Yeah.
But the only reason I never came across it or was taught it was because there's some people that just don't want that to be known.
One of the first things that aliens told me is that every single person is telepathic, that every single person has the ability to do all of the Claire things, but that you have been, and every single person has the ability to steer reality with their mind, which is not how I would define mind, the part of you that's thinking all the time, not your conscious mind. And they said the reason that nobody has access to that is because, specifically in this culture, you are told to ignore your imagination as a child, and your imagination is where all of that stuff exists.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what's so frustrating. It's like, motherfucker, what? Like, why? It's just like we're gonna never get anywhere if that's the game. You know, if there's a certain group of people that can have the ability to instill certain ideas in a culture, get everybody to think that way, and never question it, and never be able to imagine maybe it's a little different. Nope, that's not proven fact. That's a dangerous idea. It's just like the child part of me is like, why are there fucking rails on this sandbox? Like, I want to be able to fucking play.
And it's so built into the system that parents end up being the primary conditioner in their children's lives, and then also sending children to school so young so that you are really kind of separated from your imagination. I mean, your parents participate in, you know, the Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny, Santa. We talked about that stuff before, but we deleted the episode, where your parent is kind of, you know, as a parent, it's fun and I've done it, but like playing the fantasy with your children. But then when they reach 7 or 8, they find out that that's not real. around the same time that parents are going, that's not real when there's a monster under your bed. That's not real. This isn't real. This isn't real. It's so it crushes it when you're very young. And then that's just in your head. That's just your imagination. You're really taught to ignore your imagination. And only now in the last 10 years has there been an emphasis on being an artist. But when I was young, there was so much rhetoric about what a waste of time it was to be an artist and how you're never going to make it being an artist, whatever. So we have started to heal the relationship with the imagination. But I also remember how like the school system framed indigenous cultures and the way indigenous cultures, you know, did ceremonies for weather and everything else. And like now I'm learning at 47 years old how to reconnect with the earth and how, oh, you mean they actually knew exactly what the fuck they were doing with the planet? Do you know what I mean? But the scientific materialism will tell you like, oh, those guys thought they were talking to the earth,
just such
you know,
imaginative beings.
Yeah,
None of
but
it
now
was
we
real.
know only machines can do things. You know, it's like so stupid.
Yeah.
Scientific materialism is so dumb when you really think about it. You're just literally cut off from your emotional body, the ether, like all these points of awareness that absolutely exist, some of which we've reconnected with in the awakening process. We're obviously not balls out telepathic. But when you think about a nonverbal autistic child, they're not getting conditioned into the matrix by their parents,
Right,
or the system, because everything is kind of built differently for them. For many of them, because the system for a long time operated as if they had nothing going on inside their minds.
Yeah, just completely rejected them.
Right. And so they just treated their bodies or whatever. You know, I would say the nonverbal autistic people I know are closer to my age, where, you know, the way that this system treats disabled people is wild. And that is because humans are only seen as workers. And if you can't be a worker, then you have no worth. Yeah, it's just a complete misunderstanding of what disabled people are when you look at it from the perspective of like energy expressing and energy expressing outside of the boxes, right? Especially in an age full of boxes. But the cross-up planning doesn't care about that. The cross-up planning cares about if you're able to procreate or if you're a productive member of society. Like, can we get you, you know, building something or working in a factory or something? We don't care about your consciousness. And so they don't have any of that conditioning telling them to get out of their imagination at a young age.
It's in fact the only place they really can exist.
Exactly.
In the imagination. So they're enhancing it. That's what I thought was interesting about the podcast is like that some of them, like they had no ability to communicate and connect to people in the normal cultural way. But we as humans like need that connection. And so they figured out how to get the connection. And that was through reading people's minds, connecting, realizing there was a whole world where they could converse and talk to their friends that are in another part of the globe. All of that, like, because it needed to happen and they just figured that out, you know? The imagination and it's like, it's probably so much more active and so much more, has so much power for and potential to like innovate, you know, but most of culture just thinks they're worthless people that are going to be sick and bedridden their whole lives.
Well, I'm so glad we have evolved as a culture here in the last 10 years that I think we understand. I feel like most people understand versus like the way that the boomer generation was oriented toward disability. I feel like Gen X and younger look at it different.
It's interesting too, because there's like this bumps up into the whole idea that like, you know, a lot of these mental illnesses and just in general health has been, you know, seems to be affected by our eating habits, the poisons in the food and the air. And so you could look at this as like people are getting more and more sick because there's not a lot of, the culture in general. It's like we've made poison natural. We don't have, so it's hard for me to like see some of these, autism has risen in the last, 50, 60 years. It's like this spike is crazy. And a lot of people correlate that to the poisons in the food, the chemicals. And so I think that's true too. But this idea that like a lot of these people that we're saying have a disability potentially have these like latent superpowers is almost like if there was some nefarious plan to slow people down and poison them, get them fat over a slow amount of time, get them addicted to poisons. The intention would be, if that's occurring, that they are trying to either slow people down or kill them, whatever nefarious plan you want to put at it. But in doing that, they accidentally
unlock
create
human potential.
A door to unlock these latent superpowers that then once, the average person sees that, goes, oh, this is possible for me too, then we all start to become psychic. We turn on these latent powers. So it's like, that's a trickster element of the whole, matrix that we're in, is that when a group of people has a nefarious plan and they set forth to do that, something else kind of comes in and stirs that pot and makes it not completely work, and in fact work against that plan in the long run. And I think that's like potential. I don't know if it might actually be all way more soupy than that, and just kind of it is just naturally happening. There's not like a plan to it, but yeah, so I think both those could be true at the same time. But it also makes a lot of sense when we've talked about, going into this Cross the Sleeping Phoenix. It's just going to be a different world. The way we connect, the way culture is, I see that, that world being much more conducive for telepathic communication, almost as like a need, a necessity to go along with that background frequency changing, is like something we're calling a disability now because of beings can't partake in culture like everyone else, is not going to be a disability soon if we're not doing that anymore.
100%.
And so it's almost just this like transitional period where we're realizing, a lot of people that have a disability don't really have a disability in certain parts of reality. They actually have a leg up.
Yeah, I remember the aliens told me a long time ago that the superhero like mythology is true. And when you think about like X-Men or Spider-Man, where they're poisoned and the poison unlocks some hidden potential. And so I think it can be both at the same time. I think for some people, when I hear people saying like, we need to figure autism out and stop it or whatever, to me, that's always just felt like, you're not going to, and the human race is actually going that direction. Was it caused by the diet of glyphosate? I don't know. Maybe. I don't think it matters. I think that human beings adapt. A lot of beings adapt, and it is just kind of funny to think that, like if you're trying to poison people to dumb them down, and you actually make them like way more intelligent. So I think it's a combination of things. The episode I listened to with you was like talked about what a savant was and how there are throughout history people who had autism or likely had autism before they started diagnosing it, who would know things there's like no reason that they should know. Mm-hmm. Like a 2-year-old being able to speak another language or whatever. And so they talked about the incidents with nonverbals finding out that they do know multiple languages and everything else. I thought that was really interesting. I kept getting, and I think that the Vyvanse is making me a little more aggressive than usual, so I'm trying not to go full fucking rant right now, but the thing that stood out to me so loud in the episode that I listened to, I guess I listened to the end of one episode and the beginning of another, was everyone she interviews in that chunk that I was listening to anyway, they're either using a pseudonym because they don't want to lose their job. they tell a story of how everyone at the school for nonverbal kids knew about telepathy but kept it a secret because they didn't want to get 5150'd.
Yeah, because there was one or two of them that got fired, and they sent them to a psych ward.
Yeah. So let me ask you about scientific materialism. If your real is so real, then why can it never be challenged without people losing their license? There was like a speech pathologist. It's like, it sounded like the impression I got from it was like they have to sign things to prove that they're not nuts.
Yeah.
And when you are in a relationship with a unhealthy person, like a narcissist or whatever, their primary weapon when you try to leave or when you try to speak to truth is to tell you that you're crazy. And so this is something when someone tries to challenge the Western medicine machine in any way, this is how they get treated. Like you get called crazy and you lose your job. And now that was the thing that I found most interesting and a little bit infuriating, but then also obvious, is that there are all these people that are well aware of the fact for decades now, apparently, that telepathy exists in this community. And it's just kind of an open secret because no one wants to be called crazy, even though large groups of people know. And they know that like the system will come for you if you talk about it, which really, when you think about that, I mean, really think about that. That makes me even like, I ordinarily just want to call scientific materialism like a game that we were playing and, you know, give it the benefit of the doubt. But when scientific materialism will go out of its way to gaslight and destroy the life of someone who acknowledges that something besides the physical reality is happening, makes it seem a little more nefarious.
Yeah. And that's so crazy to me, just this idea that there's like, because there's one story where the teacher starts experiencing, she figures out a couple of her students are reading her mind, and then she starts to like experiment with them, and she ends up learning how to do it. Like one of the kids like helps her learn to do it. So now she first of all, she's experiencing the kids being telepathic in ways that she could like prove in front of her, and then she's experiencing it, and you're gonna get punished for something you are experiencing and just trying to talk about. We're not really talking about if it's real or not at this point. It's happening. Like,
right.
The person is experiencing it, and when they try to go tell anyone about it, you get your life ruined. It's just so crazy to me. Like that should enhance the science behind it. Like people should be like, wow, this is even more provable. Like we need to study this more. We haven't been able to prove it yet, but we should study it more. We should become curious about it. Instead, it's you jump cut to these kids are lying or you're crazy and everything you guys are experiencing is not real. Like I'm going to say that because I'm the science guy and I've done all the studies. Your experience is not real.
If it's telling you that your experience is not real, like nothing used to make me more mad than the concept of anecdotal.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, when Western medicine minded people would criticize herbal remedies that have been here for thousands of years and worked for indigenous people for thousands of years. When they would criticize anything outside of this really kind of clunky machine model that never cures anything. And I would say like I've used garlic instead of antibiotics for a lot of my life. Like previous to Lyme, I used garlic pills a certain way and they worked for lots of things for me. That's not medical advice. And then you'd say that to someone who has that other mind. They're like, well, that's anecdotal. And it's like, well, what the fuck? Like if it works for me, then what result from a laboratory could possibly matter more than that for me?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, that's such a fucking weird way to look at things. Is extremely disempowering, and it's a culty system of control. When I think of what a cult is, I think of you have someone outside of you telling you to deny your own experience and follow something else. And so
this is why it's like it's so hard not to just come to the conclusion that we are in some matrix that's being controlled, or like we're all these really powerful beings that come in to forget. And then the game for the they is see if we can keep them suppressed and outside their power. And you have to try so goddamn hard because a human being seems to be some kind of resilient tank that can get poisoned and fucking do all kinds of crazy shit to it, yet they still can like rise to the occasion and deprogram anything. It's just when you have situations like this where you have, you know, people having direct experiences and then the authority figures saying, no, that's not true, trying to, you know, suppress that as much as possible. The only conclusion I can come to is that there's a they trying to lie and keep you out of your power. It's like the only thing that really makes sense. Now, if that's some real, like how factual and how detailed that plan is, I don't know. I definitely think it's deeply programmed and generational. So there's like not a lot of people that know they're doing that. It's like deeply, deeply programmed. And it's kind of the reverse. They think they're, you know, standing up for something true and valuable. We have to make sure these are all hard facts because that's what keeps us safe moving forward. But there's just so many contradictions in all of that scientific materialism stuff. It's hard not to just, again, come to this conclusion. There's like a real nefarious plan to stop the like what seems to be the natural part of the human to come online, because it does completely make that control system non-existent and you can't enact it anymore. I mean, if they say, oh yeah, telepathy seems to be real, it's, you know, happening all over the place with autistic people, but actually you guys are all telepathic. You just need to practice it. If we all became telepathic, it's like they can't keep secrets anymore.
Right.
You can't manipulate people. You can't do any of that. So of course, something somewhere is trying to stop that from happening. There's no other answer to it to me. But to me, I mean, it doesn't bother me anymore because I'm like, you can see how little and like non-powerful they are at doing this. It's like if we all just let us naturally kind of come back online, like the problems will all be solved. They can't stop that. You can't put that back in the bag once it's out. And I think there's just so many parts of the way culture has been evolving these last 2 or 3 years. Like there's so many people coming online and believing things that 10 years ago were really
like
whack.
So wild.
That it's inevitable. It's like eventually going to happen. It's still frustrating to see the hypocrisy and the, you know, just trust the facts kind of thing, where like science used to be about like there is never an answer. You always have to speculate and hypothesize, and there is no hard fucking facts.
Yeah, I feel like the way that science was presented in school was this playfully curious experimentation. You have a hypothesis, you try it out, and then you come to a conclusion. And I don't even agree with the conclusion part, because I understand that reality loads according to the observation and the bias. And so everything we quote unquote prove in science will later be disproven because someone will look at it from a different perspective, and then we'll all kind of go do that, you know, as well. And that's the way consciousness is as well. Like most of our life is dedicated to developing our conscious, and we will live in one paradigm, and then, you know, and that will become obvious the longer this podcast goes on. We will end up in the opposite of it because that's how consciousness works. And so we might be, we went through a period where we were really anti-tech, really anti-AI, anti-TikTok, you know, in like 2021. And then we looked at it from a different perspective, and then it kind of opened up in the other direction. And that's just kind of a microcosm, but a lot of science that is like quote unquote settled or whatever, all of this stuff is really built around corporations. And I don't think people understand, like, if there is a they, it is, you know, people who make a lot of money, own a lot of the monopolies in you know, this is all US obviously, but the US affects the whole world. And every day it becomes more and more obvious to me. And some of this is the cross of planning. Like, the cross of planning definitely supported this. This isn't how the cross of planning had to play out.
Right.
Okay, so we had a wandering away from the microphones to get some water, combined with a toddler, or I guess she's not a toddler anymore, a child FaceTiming. So, and now he has left to go get the cats.
Sorry, it's snowing in North Carolina. Rare occurrence.
Okay, so I don't know where we're stitching this back. So I think I was ranting about the scientific materialism perspective. I think what I was trying to say is, nowadays I think it's a million tiny agendas where people have, specifically people who identify with academia or have a position within the scientific materialism framework, are now going to protect this, even though the human consciousness seems to be ready to outgrow it, right? So I'm sure it's not religion also, interestingly. Religion, even though on Christmas Eve the Pope did 100 rituals, 100 weird-ass rituals, religion is also very gatekeepy about us tuning into other points of awareness. They think everything's fucking demonic, or when I was in church, it was super spiritual. They don't, you know, they want to talk about miracles in the Bible all the time, but they don't want them to happen. And Christians are often, this is shifting, I guess, for some, but Christians often thinks that a lot of this stuff is demonic. Right. So as we start to evolve as humans, I do believe that human consciousness potential is about to have a massive leap. And that's kind of what we've all been a part of. But I think that things that would have been framed as a miracle 20 years ago, or supernatural or impossible during most of our lives, are going to become very commonplace.
Yeah.
And when I was in alien school, everything, all of the dreams where a lot of that stuff would take place was during a moment in time, which is the moment of time that I primarily came here for, it seems, that I was being prepared for at least, was a time where simultaneously human consciousness did a massive leap, and there was telekinesis, levitation, like all these supernatural things that we were always told aren't real. At the same time that there was like a militarization of the United States. All my stuff's very specific to here.
That's your phone.
It's so hard for me to keep a thread right now, and it's Lily.
It's 16. Oh.
I'm podcasting right now. So hard. We usually record this on Wednesday so that children are all at school and they can't interrupt, but the house was filled with them this Wednesday, so we are recording right before we put it out. Anyway, there was like an overreach government militarization is how I experienced it back then. I would now say we're kind of in that moment. We're at the beginning of that moment, I think, where the government whatever the fuck, the system tries to clamp down at the same time that human consciousness goes beyond what they can do. and they lose, obviously. And a lot of people who have similar aliens or similar gifts or whatever are like, yeah, it'll be rocky for a minute, but ultimately they lose. I have never known how literal that was going to be until we have started to approach that time. I think the next year or two will kind of indicate how that's going to play out for the next 10 years or something. But when we were listening to the telepathy tapes, I had such a clear vision of how the cross of planning culture and the cross of sleeping phoenix culture are going to clash over the next 10 years. And it doesn't necessarily have to be super negative, but I think that when we talk about the split between two groups, this is the split.
Scientific materialism
And material spirituality. Because material spirituality is just a name I gave it for humans are accessing all the points of awareness. So you're in the physical material reality, but you are also accessing the emotional body that most scientific materialists don't have access to. And the ether, where we can all communicate things. You know, when they're talking about meeting on the hill, they're meeting in the ether.
Yeah.
And in the ether, you can create rooms to hang out with other people. And we would know that if we weren't conditioned into only acknowledging material reality when we were under the age of 7.
Yeah.
And you can heal things and your body can direct you and guide you in life. You and I basically at this point of deconditioning, we make every decision with vibes. Like if we're making a big purchase, it's literally what does it feel when I stand in the energy of this car, right? And has not led us wrong yet, but it took a lot of deconditioning out of the mind to get there. Our life is pretty supernatural, and I don't even think we have scratched the surface yet. This is where reality is going. For people who are entrenched in scientific materialism, for people for whom are going to have a huge ego death to face that, right? So when we talk about somebody who spent 6 figures to go to college to become some sort of academic whatever in that world, it's going to be difficult for them to open their mind to something else because they're very conditioned and brainwashed, propagandized, whatever you want to call it. B, it's an ego death because their identity, especially if they're credentialed and that was a climbing the top of the hill for them, the top of the ladder for them. They've been the top of the food chain. And now it's reality is actually doing this other thing where you have to literally start at the beginning. And there are people who have actually been operating in these non-physical points of awareness for a long time. And also people who operate in the non-physical points of awareness don't have the hierarchical thing that odds are for a lot of people. Neil deGrasse Tyson is a great example of that, is someone whose ego is extremely tied up in knowing and being an expert. The world in which experts had the answers has an enormous amount of unchecked, unquestioned arrogance and kind of controlling, kind of whatever. It's you can be a real shitbag in that realm if you are an expert. We don't question that for some reason, we question a guru or, other types of leaders. A guy who's the head of a fucking improv troupe we put more scrutiny on than an expert in a field who often have the same yucky things, right? Yeah. So I think for people... Now, I've known so many atheists and scientific materialists to pop awake. And so it might just be really easy. But I felt like I saw very clearly, I think the telepathy tapes is going to make major headway. I think it's going to gain a lot of momentum. And I think it's going to break the dam of conversations about consciousness and awakening in a way that we've not really seen yet. The amount of people on that podcast who are like, yeah, I've known about telepathy for 10 years. I haven't said anything. That's the ones you're seeing, right? So how many other people, once something like this happens, like a couple people come out and they speak their truth, then the floodgates open, right? That is going to cause an opportunity for scientific materialists and people in academia and people who've made their life, built their life around this thing, or this is what gives them a sense of safety and security, is to believe that everything is decided in a lab with double-blind studies, whatever, to either have an awakening and start to shift into the new thing, or to fight it. And I think that's going to be a really interesting showdown that will have no impact on us other than to watch it. But so I heard a TikTok the other day that made me want to listen to the telepathy tapes, because I was like, I did not like the vibe of this at all. No shade to this person who seems to be really into science. I didn't look too deeply into her, so she might be a scientist of some sort. I do not share this perspective, and I'm going to pick it apart because I don't share it, but more power to you if you believe in this.
Are clearly unethical. You can go check out my other videos. In this part of my deep dive, we're going to discuss the connection between autism and psychosis. Psychosis is a condition that can bring about delusions and unorganized thought patterns. A person with psychosis may apply value to patterns where there isn't value. They may see an importance in connections that other people don't see. Oftentimes it's very illogical. Now, telling a person who is going through psychosis that their delusions are valid causes more harm than good. Now, first of all, autistic people are already predisposed to believing that telepathy is real. Okay, so this is confirmation bias. Now, this may be because psychosis and schizophrenia occur at a higher rate in autistic individuals.
I'm already so pissed.
I'm so pissed. Yeah. Okay. So I just want to stop there and say that the selective use of confirmation bias is always so interesting to me, in that you are clearly in this TikTok coming from the perspective that telepathy is not real, because you are making the assumption that everyone who is experiencing it is having delusions.
Right.
And as I've said on this podcast before, psychosis is real. I've seen a lot of people in psychosis doing what I do and talking about what I talk about. I encounter a lot of people in psychosis. If you go to the pinned post on my Patreon, free Patreon, is a list of mental health practitioners that are awake, that can help you kind of sort it out. I've experienced psychosis. I get it. I know what she's talking about. I have not yet. Anything I heard on the telepathy tapes, none of that was psychosis. Obviously, I'm not a mental health professional, but I do. There's a vibe with psychosis, and connecting patterns that aren't there is like, patterns exist, and being able to read patterns is actually a gift within the game. You do have to know the difference between ruining your life while trying to chase synchronicities, and understanding when patterns are standing out in a way that matters and when they don't, whatever. That's all part of navigating being awake. But so far, I find this extremely dismissive of people's lived experience, writing it all off as delusion, and then even citing confirmation bias without acknowledging the fact that you are obviously biased that telepathy doesn't exist.
Right. And
then it's like, autistic people are predisposed to believing telepathy exists. Why might that be?
Yeah.
You know, when I then went deep diving, and there were multiple fellow autistics saying that they had a similar response to telepathy tapes that I did, which is just like, yeah, we're telepathic. Like, are other autistic people like shocked at the telepathy? Don't we all know we're telepathic? Which is the same response I had, is like, yeah, I can't go number 2 red square, mostly because I think that's dumb. But it's like, yeah, I'm telepathic. Like, that's what I'm doing in readings, is reading the ether when it's shared with a person. Yeah. And so, of course, if I was never conditioned into mainstream reality, and you took away, like, you know, the burden of verbal communication, I would expect that I would be able to freely travel the ether and connect with other people because I wouldn't be so materially focused. So it's like kind of a duh to me. And that is not because I'm in psychosis. That's because I experience a more telepathic reality than maybe someone who is not neurodivergent would. So that's a wild fucking take. All right, sorry. Keep going.
Individuals. And you can see below the p-value is 0.01, which is the most respected p-value in the medical community. So they're more than 95% sure that this is the case. This study...
I don't get... What? That was probably really gross noise. I'll edit that out. This fucking Christ. I don't give a flying fuck about your p-value. You're talking about people who have autism telling you that they are having an experience, and then some dudes in some lab coats pontificating on the experience. Sorry, I'm sure it's dudes and ladies. But like, and you are smugly asserting that their assumption without the lived experience
is more valid.
Trumps the experience of the people that are having it. It's such a crazy way to look at the world.
This is why the scientific materialism thing is like, it's a sickness, it's a virus that like once people adopt that way of thinking, they'll doubt everything and they'll try to push everything that is any kind of fringe out of the system. It's like you don't even have to have the academics and scientists come out and be like, no, this isn't true. We're doing the studies. This is how we're doing it. It's like the culture just takes care of it, you know? That it's a virus that people pick up and then, you know, want to use that against for every argument. And while they're making the argument, hypocritically mention things that like they themselves you're in a bias right now and you're talking about bias, you know?
Yeah.
Things like that are, it's so frustrating to watch it become like, when I see those things, it's hard to not be like, it's hopeless, dude. When we're all just like, everyone is slowing down and stopping the natural progression because they're on some high horse about facts, you know?
And who gave you the facts? Some people that are credentialed in what?
And all of this is about like, we're referencing where there's like some baseline for consciousness that we're all assuming is like that is agreed upon. So if you're outside of that baseline, it's either psychosis, schizophrenia, it's all these other things that we're going to label. But so much of this is like subjective. The idea is she's like they often recognize patterns that have no meaning. Who says they have no meaning?
Right.
It's subjective. Like if that pattern is meaningful to that individual, it's real and it should be taken as serious. The idea that you're saying, well, they recognize a lot of patterns that are kind of stupid, that they don't mean anything, is like fully a subjective thing.
It's a very subjective thing. It's a very Western, white, like your scientific materialism is so fucking new and exclusive to this culture, to the best of my knowledge. Like all the, you know, when you start to go through your awakening and you think you've discovered something that no one else knows about because you're a fucking United States citizen, and then you find out about all the Eastern religions and you find out that all of these other cultures, the indigenous cultures, they all had a connection with all of this stuff. And now we're talking about p-values. And some people who have not had this experience saying they're 90%, 98% certain about somebody else's experience that they've never had. I can't imagine, when I'm talking about telepathy, I can't imagine someone less qualified to talk about telepathy than a fucking scientist who's neither autistic nor telepathic.
And there's so much of what science doesn't, like, we don't know about consciousness or the brain. There's so many things that, like, science straight up says, like, yeah, we don't know. We don't know the answer to that. I mean, a vast amount about consciousness and the brain. And so then when telepathy comes up, you're so sure that it's not real. But you also, on the other hand, say that you don't really know anything about consciousness. We can't tell where it's coming from. So how could you so surely say that telepathy is not real? The hypocrisy is crazy. It's deeply frustrating.
Did I tell the story on this podcast of, I have a friend who's a scientist, a comedian friend. We're not very close now, but when I was living in LA, we had gotten pretty close, and I would never talk to someone like him and he would never talk to someone like me, but we like met at a comedy festival or whatever. And then there was just kind of a mutual respect between the two of us. And for me, I was like, you're not as big of an asshole as most scientists types are. And he was like, and you don't seem out of your mind like most people who say the stuff you say. And then he was always really drawn to the connection. I would assume he's probably going to go through an awakening at some point, but he was always really drawn to the connection between the two of like, why is it schizophrenia in our culture, but it's like treated differently in other cultures?
Yeah.
Like, what would make you a spiritual leader in a community, but here we pathologize it, which I thought was cool. And so at one point he was interviewing me for something. And this is right before I started Soberish, maybe right after. And that whole like late, like second half of 2019, I guess all of 2019 was about me wrestling. It was becoming very obvious that the reason I got This Is Not Happening and all of the success in comedy at that moment was because I was supposed to start talking into microphones about consciousness, finally. And at that point, I would talk about it openly with people that knew me, but I was in the comedy scene and I didn't, most of them are atheists, and I just kind of didn't want to be seen as crazy or whatever. So I'd grown resistant to talking about it. I just kind of seen what happens to other people when they talk about it or whatever, which is probably why this is getting me going. And anyway, so we're at this kind of long interview. We're at like lunch or whatever that turns into lunch and coffee, and it goes on for hours. And he's interviewing me for a potential show he was going to make. And at one point, telepathy comes up, and I say, well, I have experienced telepathy with certain people. Like, the more open you are, the easier it is for the exchange of information. It just isn't what you think it is. And I think for people for whom verbal communication is our primary language, the telepathy that is being explained on the telepathy tapes is different than what we understand communication to be. And I think they are, if I listen to the entire thing, I would probably hear someone say this, they are then having to translate it for us to understand what they're doing. So because we communicate with words, which is extremely clunky, that we think they are having whole ass conversations with words, but quiet. And that's, I would imagine, not what it is. And right. I did hear a story of someone saying, a speech pathologist saying she was working with a child who said, you have to put colors over my head in order for me to understand the information you're saying. And that's because outside of this clunky ass talking with words, you download packets of information and they are in shapes and colors. And so P has said this before, I wish I could just download the shapes and the colors. This is how it is in my mind, communication. I am someone who's very good at communicating outwardly. I think I picked that up along the way, but like it would be much more efficient but I would just be downloading a knowing to you. It wouldn't be a fucking voice memo. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, and it's relevant information, and we are so conditioned because of materialism, to orient around irrelevant information, and especially when trying to physically prove things, it's irrelevant information. So if I'm in an environment and this person is thinking about doing harm to me, I would 100% be aware of that, as long as I didn't have biases or attachments or whatever that would prevent me. But I almost always knew when the cops were coming, when someone would go kind of nuts when we were on meth, and would start to prepare themselves to like pull a gun on everybody or whatever, I always knew. And I could always hear them beforehand. And I can hear most of what the gist of what people are actually saying. That's literally what my sessions are, is you tell me what you think it is and I'll listen to what you're actually thinking. So anyway, I try to explain to him that like I experienced telepathy. I'm probably not the best at it because I didn't have the language of conditioning yet, but I'm still like working through stuff. I said, but I've experienced it quite a bit. And he said, and then before he could even say that, I said, no, I can't give you a number or a color. And he was like, and he was going to say that, obviously. And so then he was like, why not? And I'm like, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work like that. I'm sure there are people who are super good at that it could work like that. For me, I have this filter that things have to be like real or they have to matter or something. I don't know. It's not a parlor trick. And so, it's similar with like me reading tarot cards for people for entertainment or whatever. It just, I don't know. It's a PDA thing for me. So anyway, so I started to get stressed out and I got up and I went to the bathroom and the aliens were like, and I had never had this framework before this conversation, but the alien said, the non-physical reality is above the physical reality. And the people in the physical reality, which is actually the absolute bottom of the barrel, believe themselves to be the pinnacle of reality. They are never going to, the members of that point of awareness are never going to get to see all the other points of reality so long as they believe they are the pinnacle. Because we are not going back down to the physical reality to prove it to them because we don't give a shit. And I mean, I was almost crying. I was so stressed out. I think it was just activating a lot of like defensive-ness or feeling embarrassed or whatever. And I came out of that bathroom like, yeah, fuck this. And so then I came back and I was like, listen, because then they said, you worked your ass off to access all of these parts of yourself and all these abilities. You do not have to tap dance for people who aren't able to access those parts. Like, that's their problem. We will continue to exist in all of these different areas and they continue to exist in the density and think that they've got it all figured out. It like literally couldn't matter less. That was such a turning point in my life that really had a lot to do with Soberish even either starting or Soberish becoming an awakening podcast. So I came back and was just kind of like, yeah, I mean, I really don't know how to explain it to you because you don't understand it. I mean, if I'm being honest, like you don't have enough categories of reason for me to explain it to you. So fuck. I don't remember why I was saying that. Do you want to keep listening to this? I think that's the moment that we are in collectively. I feel like when I was listening to the telepathy tapes, I could see the next, let's say 5 years being kind of like when that boom hits of consciousness, there being kind of a war between people who are experiencing it and people who believe that there's an epidemic of psychosis.
Yeah.
Well, I'm here for it. Of all the fighting that I've had to sit through people doing, like, oh my God, you won't be able to keep me off of TikTok. Okay. More of this dumb shit.
Found that psychosis was present in 32% of autistic individuals and schizophrenia was present in 21% of autistic individuals. Now that was related to this figure here. So this chart shows broad symptom categories as they relate to the autism spectrum disorder and psychosis group. Now, comparatively to neurotypicals, delusions, hallucinations, thought disorders, mania, and depression are more prevalent in the autistic neurotype. I have no judgment towards people who experience psychosis. In fact, we should be supporting them more by not triggering their delusions. So another reason why the telepathy tapes are unethical is because they're choosing a group that has a predisposition to believing in telepathy and a group.
Sorry, but what would give you more of a predisposition to believing in telepathy than experiencing telepathy?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like
who has a higher incidence of psychosis. A psychologist with basic training knows delusions should not be disputed or reinforced. The delusions become fixed. Whatever evidence you give the person, they're not going to believe you, which is evident in the comment sections of some of my videos, to be honest with you. So just to reiterate, we shouldn't reinforce journalism like the Telepathy Tapes because it doesn't help high support needs autistic folks navigate the world, function independently, and it relies on a population that has a high incidence of psychosis and delusionary thought processes, and a cognitive bias towards already believing in telepathy. And if you're a parent of an autistic child, then you should use therapeutic modalities that are supported with scientific evidence. The Telepathy Tapes are clearly unethical.
How is that done so far? How are we doing on that? Like making sure autistic people are seen and recognized and can. It hasn't worked so far with your dumbass scientific fucking procedures. It's so stupid. It's like I haven't listened to the whole thing, but like there's many points in that podcast that you can hear like some of the kids that are autistic are finally feeling hope and they're feeling seen because there's somebody doing a study on it, something that's so natural to them. And many of them have, benefited from having a teacher that sees it, believes it, and interacts with them in that way. They are less depressed. They feel finally like they're seen in the world. It's like this is the thing that's helping them, and it's something that we haven't been able to get to. And all you can do, ma'am, is get on here and like wield your scientific fucking P charts and say that this is not helping them. This is delusions of grandeur, and this is unethical that we're doing. You're insane. This is backwards. And this is what makes me, it's like when people do this, you're getting in the way of like evolving and letting us all accept something new and play with it because you're on some high horse that like it doesn't make sense. Like this is not good for you either, and it's so frustrating to see people do this. It's like, talk about delusions of grandeur. Like you, ma'am, are in a delusion, like deeply. It's so frustrating. The hypocrisy is like gnarly, and it just gets me. I do get like hopeless when someone's that circled up in their hypocrisies and just continually preaching it. I'm like, good luck. I don't know. Just that is a split. I mean, people that can't let go of that science, you end up building a reality that is a box.
Yeah,
that can no longer evolve, and it's stagnant. And I think there's so many things around this, like this moment that are interesting, that have many different rabbit trails. But one I was thinking of is like, it seems to be kicking up this like academics and the Neil deGrasse Tysons coming out and trying to rationalize and bat down ideas that are like a little woo-woo or whatever you say. And but it feels like it's because we are at this, information is speeding up so quick, the access to it is speeding up, and there are more and more people opening their minds, that you really, to keep that lid on, like you got to attack it from every direction.
Right.
And so it feels like that's kind of also part of this, is like it's inevitable. This information is going to come out. We are going to all realize there's latent abilities, realities not like what we've been taught it to be. And for people that are, in the science mindset, and if that's splitting, they are trying to protect their, reality from crumbling. And it's why I think they would also, a lot of people want to stick to this science has already been settled. We're not opening that up again. It's, we're not arguing. Like, we know this is the facts, which again, I would like to mention that that's not true for science ever. Once you come to a conclusion and a day has passed or an hour has passed, now there's more things we can add to it and might get a different conclusion. So you keep trying. You just always try.
Right.
It's never finalized. But I could see why you would come up with that idea to say, this is finalized, stop pushing it, because there's too much more information coming out. It's like, it's just overflowing out. The only thing you can do is be like, stop, the science is settled. We need to we no longer have these woo people coming in and trying to, degrade my job and my worth. So it's like ego, it's bias, but then it's also this like that reality is crumbling. And if you're on that side, you're going to do whatever you can to try to stop the world from seemingly going into psychosis, you know, because I guess psychosis is living a life that is not scientifically proven, you know, that's what's also so frustrating to me. I feel like, I mean, I've experienced psychosis, talked to many people on psychosis, and to me, I mean, it's definitely, there's a dangerous part of it, just as fact, not because culture doesn't accept it, but because you can't ground into a reality and know what's up and down, who you are, where you're at. And so that can become dangerous because it's like you're floating, you know?
Right.
But in general, most of like what I've seen labeled as schizophrenia and psychosis, there's obviously extreme versions, but most of it is just people all of a sudden like waking up and popping into a version of reality that they didn't know was real for the last 20 years or whatever. And that experience is exciting, scary, weird, and like you have to adjust to it. And so it's somewhat normal for like, you know, a being to finally realize that or remember it. Like that's just, and so it shakes up your reality. It's not a scary sickness and something that needs to be like avoided at all costs. You know, I think that word has so much heat to it that everybody, when you hear that word and you might be getting diagnosed with it, you just immediately see one flew over the cuckoo's nest. Like you're in a psych ward for the rest of your life, you know? And I just don't think that is the case. It's much more nuanced, but that, you know, whenever they bring in psychosis or schizophrenia into conversations that seem to be natural spiritual evolution, it's frustrating too, because it's like, we don't know enough about schizophrenia and psychosis.
We never looked at it from any perspective other than science through scientific materialism.
And so you're going to reinforce schizophrenia through science because basically you're just those people that are existing outside of what science says. Well, they must be wrong. They must be sick.
And I've known like legit needs meds, needs hospital, schizophrenics.
There's always extremes.
Like I said, spiritual psychosis, I see it all the fucking time. I would say people who are in psychosis are maybe 1% of the people that I come in contact with in doing sessions with people that and like talking to them on the internet and whatever through the podcast. I definitely attract, especially soberish and AOD, like attract people who are in psychosis. I've seen people who seem to be just having a regular awakening, then seem to be in psychosis because I start getting kind of erratic emails or demands to communicate, or this happens to me all the fucking time. There's a different energy to it. There are also a ton of mental health professionals that listen to this podcast. And so maybe not this podcast, but like soberish. And I've talked to a lot of them. And I don't think that believing something outside of the material reality actually fits the criteria of schizophrenia or psychosis. There is an energy to it, first of all, and there is a destructive nature to it. There's people in psychosis specifically tend to not be taking care of their body, making huge erratic decisions, being destructive to themselves or others. The dots that they're connecting, they need everyone else to see that they're connecting. And the line between early awakening and before you get your legs, you know, your sea legs in it, and psychosis is a very thin line. And you often wander back and forth between the two, which is why I did, you know, what AOD is about, like why I did soberish, and was really what I was focused on until I started to recently focus on like helping people individuate. A lot of baby aliens is what I call people in early awakening, that first 3 years, can sound kind of manic, can be connecting dots when you first start seeing synchronicities. It's really hard not to like take them way more seriously. I've done sessions with people who have like moved across the countries because the fucking billboards were telling them to or whatever. And most of those people, I'm able to go like, okay, so this isn't as big of a deal. You have to learn how to read the synchronicities, but reality is just a feedback loop of what's inside of you. And so that is just how reality is. You have to learn to not take that so seriously. You also have to decondition the good guy, bad guy stuff. Otherwise, you can get sucked into delusions of like,
CIA's.
I'm supposed to be a hero, or conspiracy theories can be true. And also you don't need to lose your mind over them, whatever. Learning how to just be in the simulation without taking it all so seriously is a skill set that people can learn, and their behavior will seem less. In psychosis, I was fortunate enough because the lifestyle I was living that I could kind of dance with psychosis in early awakening without getting 5150, but I even 5150 myself at one point to see if they could turn it off, give me the blue pill. They did not. They were not able to, but and then there's just regular psychosis. Nothing that I heard on the telepathy tapes sounded...
It's not even close to psychosis.
Not even close. And so, I don't know. I feel like if I paid more attention to this person's content, I would probably find a bunch of shit talking about how you got to listen to people's lived experience and a bunch of like, I really don't know how a lot of the people in that like liberal, not far left, but like liberal thing, I don't know how they reconcile their alleged social justice takes and scientific materialism. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because scientific materialism is insulting to every culture that believes beyond the physical realm. And so I don't know how you think you're an advocate for that.
It's insane.
And also you're completely disregarding the experience of most humans. Humans.
It's like her take is like way more disruptive and problematic than that podcast ever will be.
Yeah.
And that's the hypocrisy is like she's trying to say the opposite is just wild.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this will be very, very interesting to watch this play out over the next few years. And when I looked at the comments of that, I was struck by how many people were in agreement. Yeah. And, you know, those people share like they're all conditioned. And so it's just all like, yeah, I guess you guys you all just believe in the consensus reality that you grew up with. You're the same people insulting parents who are letting their kids look at iPads or whatever. You just think that if you are rigid enough, humanity won't progress into something else. You know,
it's so exhausting. Why? It's like trying to fucking stop the progression is crazy. Yeah, I mean, they don't realize it obviously, but they think they're saving something. But it's like, yeah, it's a split mechanism, I guess. It's frustrating to see, but if you see it for what it is, just like a split, then I guess it is what it is. Yeah, so the telepathy tapes are cool. I don't know how much of it I can listen to for the aforementioned reasons. But I'll finish it. I've only got a couple more. I think or is it still going? Is it still like coming out?
Well, that was season 1, I guess. Okay, so I did listen to a bit of there was like a recap episode that someone told me to listen to. And so I did listen to that. I listened to part of it. Like I said, it's really hard to keep my attention with that the way it is. Yeah. It's really hard to keep my attention anyway. I found out yesterday when we were trying to listen to it, if I try to listen to information for more than like 10, 15 minutes, that's why I love TikToks. But especially like an hour, like you could just fucking pack so much information into your system without stopping to process it. Mm-hmm. I cannot. It'll put me to sleep. And I used to call it like a download nap because I do get download naps too. When I get a really interesting piece of information, it would put me to sleep. But I'm realizing, oh no, I had a hard time staying awake in school as well. Like if someone's just talking at me and I'm not talking back. It's not a back and forth. Really fucking hard for me to process it and like pay attention to it without tuning it out and starting to daydream. And then if I force myself to listen to it, I'll start to fall asleep. So this happens a lot when we're trying to listen to podcasts in the car, even if I'm interested. If I'm not interested, I'm just like not paying attention anyway. And so
she's not a really good podcast partner. In fact,
no, a terrible,
horrible. It's a little bit of a bummer.
I think you're very attracted to ADHD personality, but then, yeah, you're the guy who listens to it and gives me the cliff notes, which works out great for me.
Yeah, I can just. There's a difference between giving the cliff notes and the real experience. Sometimes I'm missing things, and sometimes I'm not. But
yeah.
It's like it is what it is. I think I used to in the past. I would listen to a podcast. It would blow my mind in so many different ways, and I would want to immediately share it with you because I wanted your mind to be blown the exact same way.
Right.
And I couldn't do that in the cliff notes, and I would like try to force you like just listen to the whole thing. But then I realized it's like we're all having different experiences. So like you're not maybe going to get your cherry popped like I did on that podcast. It just is what it is. So I let go of it a while ago. But yeah, it's frustrating sometimes. If we're like in a car and I'm like, we got 2 more hours and I'm vibing and you're like.
Yeah, I know. And then I used to try to like force myself to stay awake because I didn't want to offend you. And it's all this internal turmoil for no reason. So then I asked ChatGPT yesterday, and it had all these reasons for why someone with autism and ADHD would struggle to listen to things long form.
It's because you're schizophrenic?
It's information. Yeah, well, I think that's been well established. It's information overload, and it's also just the way I process has to be like multifaceted. So and part of this is also I'm a 3-line. So it's like if I am deep diving something, the way that I'm doing it when I'm by myself is like I'll listen to someone talk about something for a little bit and then I'll look it up and I'll read a little bit. And then I want to go find someone who's had the experience. And that's where I get most of my information is I'm really only respect information from people who've lived it rather than like whatever. But then I have to talk about it for a second. And then I need to go back and it has to be, what is that called? Kinetic or something. It can't be, I can't just read and read and read. And I can't just listen to someone talk and listen to someone talk. I can watch someone do something is probably where I learn the easiest is just do it in front of me and let me watch it and kind of emulate it. And I think that that's pretty obvious in our relationship. Like, the things I've watched you embody over time, I've been able to learn a lot from just because I have kind of a learning disability. Yeah. And I think all those things like helped keep me from getting programs in the system, Let me see if I had any other notes. I have a session soon.
It really does feel like it's kind it's cool that this podcast the Telepathy Tapes has happened and it's like popular. Because I do feel like we're on that, like we're at that tipping point of so much information coming out that people are starting to take seriously. And there are a couple things that if just 1 or 2 of these new ideas get accepted, it does radically change everything and it turns into a snowball effect of everything else. Yeah. I've always said like 0 point energy, if that actually like we accept that, I mean, it's been here, people have it, but if that is allowed into the culture, which again, this is also the reason it probably wouldn't just be allowed, it changes everything. I mean, so many things that you would never think are related to our energy consumption would radically shift if we had that technology. If we all, knew telepathy was real and started to learn it, it snowballs into so many amazing things because like you can't keep secrets the same way. You can't manipulate people. And so the more that we can have like any kind of slow push towards that to get that to tip over, I think is really great and valuable. And and this seems like one of those, you know, like we're in the kind of perfect timing right now for this to start happening. A lot more podcasts are, you know, people are listening to them much more nowadays. So that's where the truth has to come and has to play out that way. Then it's great, I guess. But
yeah, it's crazy when the aliens, you know, the internet was barely a thing when I first started talking to the aliens. And so it's so funny the way I imagine things playing out back then without having the information that I have now versus now. But they presented it as if like people would start to realize, like people would find out that these things were real. And so 20 years ago, I'm like, they're just going to put it on the news, you know, that it's real. And then we have all this decentralized media now that I don't even think people realize that, like, you can just put out a fucking podcast with a perspective and it goes viral and now everyone knows about it, and human consciousness is shifting to a different way of looking at things. And that's just the beginning, you know? So I had a note about another thing that I was thinking about during this, and I'm sure that a lot of people have made this connection. I don't talk about this a lot because it's a weird part of the 2027 stuff. And it's just kind of like I'll see it when it gets here. I don't think it matters that much. But in human design, the 2027 stuff, it marks a mutation in the human species that moves away from Homo sapien into something that guy called Raves. And I also do just think that's funny that we go from Homo sapien to Raves, like what a scientific name we had, and then they're just here to party. And the way he describes, so he says in 2027, people will start to give birth to the next species of human that will human that will ultimately replace what we know is to be human. And that they will live alongside each other, but they won't really interact outside of the fact that we will give birth to them. Take this all with a grain of salt. I'm just like, we'll see what happens then. I've listened to some like deep cut lectures of his about this. This actually isn't very far-fetched. And this has happened throughout humanity's existence, right? As we mutate into a different form of human. And then I can't remember who it was, but the Neanderthals lived among the whatever.
Right. There's like crossover for a little bit.
Yeah. You like give birth to them and then they move on and they become their own thing. So the Raves, as he described, is that we would experience them as severely autistic. They would be nonverbal. They would have low muscle tone. And they would, I want to say, seem emotionally cold to us. And that is because they will have the solar plexus as an awareness center and not a motor. We are deeply driven by emotional energy, even though we've been largely unconscious to it, I would say. And what is happening for us is we are powering that down as well. I don't know. The human design part of that's a little bit convoluted. I disagree with some of it. But anyway, they would be, I want to say they have another center or something. I can't remember, but they're just like more advanced than we are. And they're a completely different kind of consciousness. So we are individual consciousnesses. They are part of a kind of a collective conscious in a different way than we are. And they will form pentas, which means when you get 5 of them in a room together, they will sync up their consciousness and be extremely powerful. And they won't eat the way that we eat. I want to say they're definitely vegan, but it might have been that they don't eat at all. I can't remember a lot of it now. But anyway, this seems really far-fetched. And he said that it would, one of the constructs with the cross of sleeping phoenix that comes in with the cross of penetration, I guess, they come in at the same time, is shock. And so this thing will start off with people experiencing a lot of shock. I think people are already experiencing shock. The poor people who are just like, wait, the government's not good. That'll keep going for a lot of people. And that part of the shock will be as humans start being kind of driven to procreate, and they're mostly bringing forth raves. And the raves won't want anything to do with us, which I don't really know what that looks like as far as like how do you parent them as a baby or whatever. He died before consciousness really started to shift in 2012. So the way he described it was like they would be put into institutions because humans wouldn't know what to do or whatever. The parents wouldn't know what to do. And then they would start to form these pentas in the institutions. I would say there has been such a massive shift around disability awareness that it's less likely for parents to just be throwing their kids in institutions the way that like maybe past generations did. So that would be interesting. He said the best case scenario is that people are aware of the fact that this is the next species and that we support them as much as possible and like help them get into pentas. And he said, because if you do, like you don't, they're, you know, they're very powerful. And so if, and he also said, I'm not actually going to get into that. Some of it sounds ominous or whatever. I think I was a pessimist. I enjoyed.
Yeah, this is the only part of this human design stuff that like I've had a hard time fully embracing.
Yeah,
because there's parts of it that resonate, but then it's like I can't. It always feels foggy and distant. Like when I try to imagine it, I'm like there's something missing. But I'm very open to it being kind of a translation issue. Like maybe the thing he was seeing, and that he was like kind of lining up with the zodiac and everything. Is all correct, but the way he was presenting it and the way he saw it is maybe somewhat biased, and it's not going to look that same way. I'm definitely open to like the human genes like changing over time and really becoming so different that you could put, you know, two different humans from completely different times next to each other and they would look the same, but they're completely different makeup on the inside. And so therefore, like consciously when you plug into it, it's a whole different experience. But I think that does happen relatively slowly. As maybe not like, I just think it's hard to like be embodied and imagine and like feel into how that's shifting. It's not like in 2027 every baby that comes out is going to be a rave. And
yeah, he definitely said that wasn't going to be like every kid born. Yeah, right.
But it's like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? And I think it's interesting. There's a lot of interesting information around that. And I would say some of it's already kind of confirmed in the way that like what we're seeing, you know, how it's unfolding. But yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that rave thing for a bit.
Yeah, I always just kind of put that in the same place as hybrid children from Bashar. That I was just like, okay, that's kind of weird. I mean, I guess if there is something that starts to happen, then I will be like, oh, wait a second, this guy talked about rave children.
Yeah.
I do know people who are in birth work that have said that the babies are different and that the placentas are different, and there is a difference between the children. Like, there's a difference between like Sonny and people born 20 years ago in consciousness and awareness and the way that they move through the world. And part of that's like our parenting styles, but not really. So, and then when you think the neurodivergence kind of boom started 50 years ago, not that it didn't exist before, but you've got so many people my age finding out that they're neurodivergent. It's really not, it wouldn't be surprising to me at all if it happened. But when listening to the telepathy tapes, I was like, oh, this makes it extremely feasible.
Yeah.
That it kind of took some of the woo aspect of the penta out for me, because these kids are literally talking about meeting on the hill, which is like a space that's not dimensional, in a room where they communicate with each other. That's literally what the penta is
right.
doing. And so, and there is a massive proliferation or increase of autistic people, which I do believe is an evolutionary leap, a mutation. Who knows, who cares what caused it, but it is an evolutionary leap into the next form of human consciousness. They're, low muscle tone's not uncommon these days either. So yeah, it just made that seem like, okay, interesting to see if humans really start to change. New humans really start to come in different.
Yeah.
And, that really only is an issue for the cross of planning. It's an issue for a homogenized reality. We're going to have to learn how to actually accommodate disabled people and maybe start to look at our framing of things and the idea of disability, or like why the baseline is worker bee and why everything that diverges from that is a problem, why it's framed as a problem, when you're actually maybe talking about much higher consciousness or much more capacity in something outside of making a CEO rich.
We all got to look out. If you put 5 of them together, fucking take over the world.
Yeah, that's kind of the way he framed it. I really like listening to Raw. I don't like to call anyone Raw. I kind of don't like that part of it. But I like listening to him. He's a boomer, I think, or he's really old X-Gen. And he was, I think, quad left, and he was very cross of planning. And so his kind of ominous framing of the cross of Sleeping Phoenix, I think, is coming, he's mostly talking to people who he thinks are really attached to the cross of planning. And I think he knew he wasn't going to be here. Sometimes I can hear that, and what he's in him talking just sounds like he wasn't planning on being here for much of it.
Yeah. And
so, I think he just has a much more pessimistic take on it, where I probably have maybe an overly optimistic take on it.
Yeah.
Where I think it's going to be more fun than anything else. If you like change and chaos. All right, you ready to go?
Yeah.
You feel maybe logged out?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Love you, bye.
Yeah, bye. I don't know if this is good.